About 10 years ago, I moved into a new house with my wife and our daughter, who at the time was very young. It was a nice neighborhood with many other houses, but one thing I was really excited about was the yard. We had lived in a small townhouse before that and barely had a yard at all. And the new neighborhood had a lot more space. Our yard was almost an acre, and I would say most people over there had about that as well. So after moving in and getting all the furniture in the house and stuff, there was a lot of work that I wanted to do in the yard. For example, there wasn't much landscaping. The grass had some dead spots, and there was a good number of weeds in the backyard. Soon after moving in, I went outside to do a bunch of the yard work. My wife stayed inside the house with our daughter. I remember that I worked for a few hours and then I had to go to Home Depot to get some stuff. I left and came back pretty quickly. I don't recall much of that trip because it was pretty normal. However, after I got back, I went into the backyard, sort of on the side of it from where I was working. I could see part of the street in front of our house. The street was normally very quiet because it's just residential. A short time after getting back, I saw this older car pull up and park on the side of the road. It was parked between our house and the next door neighbors. I didn't think too much of it until as a man get out and then just sort of stand inside of our yard on our property. Then the man was looking at me, slowly walked in my direction. He was moving extremely slow, and I didn't know who he was. I had met both next door neighbors as well as the ones across the street, and this guy wasn't any of them. He was kind of standing around and also kind of walking closer. And I stopped what I was doing and I began to walk over to the man to see what he wanted. However, as I approached, the man turned and then went to my left and very quickly went out of my sight because the house now blocked him. I walked faster and then arrived in the front yard, but I didn't see the man. I thought that maybe he was going to knock on our front door, but when I looked, he wasn't there. I quickly went inside and called to my wife, asking if anybody had entered the house just to be safe. Thankfully, she said nobody had, so I went back out and I looked all around the front yard and then went into the backyard as well. I didn't see the man. I wasn't quite sure where he went. There were a good number of trees and bushes around people's properties, but I didn't think that the guy was hiding or anything. I figured that he must have just cut through our yard to maybe get to somebody else's. The whole thing seemed really strange because the man's behavior was kind of odd, but overall I didn't know what else to do, so I just went back to work. I got quite a bit of yard work done and things were looking much better. I remember noticing that after several hours the man's car was still there. I continued with the work though, and when I was almost done, I remember that out of nowhere I heard something behind me. When I looked back, I saw the guy again. He was in my backyard and like 50 feet away from me. After seeing him, the man looked at me and I called out asking what he was doing in my yard. The man didn't answer me. I started to walk over to him and he quickly turned and started walking in the other direction. The man went behind some trees on the edge of the property. I walked over there and looked around. I called out for him several more times, but he never answered me. I didn't know where he went. Pretty soon, I gave up looking for him. He seemed to be off my property, really. I had no idea who this guy was or what he was doing, but it was seeming really suspicious, so I went back to work, and I remember that maybe 20 or 30 minutes later, I heard a car door closing. I moved over to get a view of the street, and I saw the car driving away. This made me feel a ton better knowing that the man was now gone. So I finished up with the work for the day, and I had the backyard looking a lot better. Then I went inside the next morning. When I got up and looked outside, I saw that the backyard was all messed up. Somebody had literally messed up most of the work that I did. I was so mad, but I also had a feeling that it was that same guy. Of course, I had no proof. I had to do most of the work over again, and I also went out and bought security cameras and put them up. However, after that, the man never returned. This has remained a strange mystery. Many years ago, when I was younger, I moved into this new apartment. The building itself was not that new. It was pretty average, but it was overall a decent place. After moving in, strange things started happening almost immediately. I can't remember if it was the first or second night that I was there, but there was a loud knock on the door late at night. It was probably at around 11 p.m. This was very strange. I remember that I got up and went over to the door. I looked out to the other side and nobody was there. It was very strange. The whole thing kind of gave me the creeps. The way the knock was very clear and deliberate. It was no mistake. It was like they really wanted to get my attention. However, nothing else happened that night. But after that, for the next 3 or 4 nights in a row, there would be a loud knocking on the door very late. It would not always beat the same time. Sometimes it was at more like 10 and other times closer to midnight. Usually stayed up pretty late, so I was always still awake for it, but each time I would go over to the door and the person who knocked would be gone. It was obviously very strange. I wasn't really quite sure if I was being pranked or what, but I was new in the building, so I didn't know any of the neighbors yet or anything, and I'm not sure how any of them would know that I was there. Either I hadn't really seen anyone on my floor when I was moving my things, and so that night, unlike the fourth night in a row of hearing the knocks on my door, I heard something else. I went to go to bed a while later. I was in my bed and trying to fall asleep when I heard another loud knocking. This time it was not coming from my front door, though instead it was coming from the wall right on the other side of my head. It caused me to sit up in bed, and I was suddenly wide awake. It did not sound like somebody had accidentally smacked the wall or something like that. It sounded like they deliberately pounded on it, much like the knocking on my door. Could this be the same person? Was it my next door neighbor? But how would they know exactly where my bed was? I guess that maybe that was just a coincidence, but it left me feeling very creeped out. There were no more knocks that night. It took me a while to fall asleep, but eventually I was able to. Saw the next morning when I was leaving for work, I noticed the apartment door next to mine, where I had heard the noises coming from that unit, was the very last door at the end of the hallway. I looked at the door and it was open a crack. I had to walk past it to get to the stairs. I thought about looking in, but then I thought now. I quickly moved past and kept going. After getting home from work that day, the door was closed again. I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, but I was very confused. As I was arriving at my apartment though, I saw somebody who was out in the hallway. It was a woman who appeared to be in her 60s or so. She was walking in my direction, perhaps to leave. And I decided I would talk to her, I said, and introduced myself, and she seemed very nice and friendly. She said that she had lived in the building almost 10 years. I asked her if she knew who lived next to me, and she told me that that apartment was currently vacant, so nobody lived there. Why had the door been open, and who was knocking on my wall from that apartment? The possibility creeped me out even more. It told her about the knocking, and she said that I should report it, and said that she had not experienced the same problem. After I went inside, I decided that if anything else happened, I would report it. Well, that night, there was indeed more knocking on my front door, late night just as usual. I reported it to the management of the building. At first, I heard nothing back other than our sponsor saying that they would look into it. The knocking continued the next night, and I also heard it on the other side of my bedroom wall, again, which really freaked me out. At least whoever this was had never entered my apartment or attempted to that. I was aware of the next day though. I did not hear any knocking at all. I almost couldn't believe it. I thought that maybe I had just missed it or something. Then the following day I was told by management that they had caught the person who was knocking on my door. Apparently for some reason the door to the unit next to mine had been left unlocked. Somebody had been sneaking into the room as well as knocking on my door late at night. They were seen on the surveillance cameras. I'm really glad that the cameras were there. I was not told who it was or if they got in trouble or what, but after that it never happened again. This happened way back when I was a kid. I was 10 years old and my family moved into a new house. It wasn't a brand new house, but a little bit newer and nicer than the previous one that we had lived. It was in the same city as well, which was nicest. So I got to keep the same friends living the reside from me were my parents and my older sisters. The neighborhood was pretty typical. Many houses, each with around the same size yard along one street. Literally one of the first nights after moving, though I was up late, everyone else had gone to bed, and I was in the living room playing video games. All the lights were off, and the TV was providing the only light that I could see. I was planning to go to bed soon, but just having too good of a time gaming. My volume was on low, so that I wouldn't wake anybody up or anything. I remember hearing outside it sounded like several cars were driving down the street. I looked over, because the street and outside everything was dead silent. What is always these two SUVs driving slowly down our quiet road, and then pulling over. They literally pulled over right in front of our house, and that made me a little nervous, so I paused my game and then crept over to the window. I was sitting on the floor, mostly out of view from the window, but I had a good view of the front yard as well as our front step. After stopping, both vehicle doors opened. He's all about 5 or 6 to men get out of the back seats, and the drivers seemed to remain in the cars. I was so creeped out because all the guys looked kind of shady, dressed in dark colors and wearing hooded sweatshirts. None of them had masks on or anything. But I feared the worst still as a whack couple of men start walking towards our neighbor's house. And then 2 men started to walk right into our front yard. My heart started racing, and I ducked down after a few moments. I heard the men walking and they got right up to our front door. None of the guys street opening it. Thankfully it was locked. I was so freaked out and didn't even want to look in fear that they might see me. I didn't hear anything though for probably a full 2 minutes, I would say. When I finally gained the courage to look, both of the guys were still just standing there. They were on the front step and I had no idea what was going on. Then I had this idea. I really didn't know what caused me to get this brave, but I just stood up and went over to the door. I did not open it, but it turned on the outside light switch. This made the light goon that was outside on the front step When it did moments later, I heard the men turn around and start to walk away. Then I went back over to the window. I watched them return to the SUV and go inside. Moments after that, I saw two other men come jogging from the other direction of the neighbor's yard. Then they got inside the other SUV. Then about 30 seconds after that, more guys got in the back of the other SUV. I was so confused. Moments later, both SUV Sengen started and drove away. I stayed up watching the street for about another hour. They never came back though. After that, I was finally able to go to sleep. The next morning, I told my parents about it. They had no clue what it could have been, but they didn't seem that concerned. Still, I was there, and I will never forget how scared I was in those moments. And looking back, I still don't know what exactly was going on. Going to someone's house like that after midnight couldn't be anything good, and they certainly were not salesmen. A few years ago, I moved into a new apartment with a roommate. This was a much better living situation for me. The last place that I had lived was this house, and I literally just rented a singular room. There I had this teeny bathroom attached, and there was like 8 other people living in the house, which was pretty large. It was also old, and the only reason that I lived there was because it was cheap, and it was the only thing that I could afford at the time. So anyway, moving on to my new apartment, it was a 2-bedroom place that I was getting with a roommate. My roommate was this guy named Jack that I had known in college. We were not really that close friends, but he's a cool guy overall. So about a week or two into moving in, I recall that both Jack and I were at home. I had just gotten back from work, and Jack was already there. It was sometime in the afternoon, and I remembered that when I got home, Jack was in the kitchen. He told me that he was going to go to the store and asked if he needed anything. And I said no, so at that point I went down the hallway and into my bedroom. It was really nice because we each had our own bathrooms attached to our bedroom. After going inside of my room, I went to the bathroom to take a shower about 10 minutes later. Or so I was out of the shower and getting dressed when I heard somebody try to open my bedroom door. The door was locked, just because I was in a habit of locking the bedroom door from the last house that I had lived in. Of course, I assumed that it was Jack who had tried to open my door. I mean, who else would it be? I wasn't sure if he was back yet or never left. It seemed kind of odd, because I thought that was going to the store. I was busy for the moment and figured that I would ask him what he wanted in a couple of minutes, and he hadn't said anything still. I found it kind of odd that Jack would just try to barge into my room like that. He had never done that before. I finished up getting dressed and shaved and then left my bedroom. This was probably like 5 minutes later. I didn't see Jack in the living room or kitchen areas, so I went over to his bedroom. His door was slightly open, but I could tell that he wasn't in the room. I called out asking what he had wanted, but he didn't answer. So then I went into my bedroom again and texted Jack. I asked him if he was at the store. He responded pretty quickly saying, yes, she was almost done shopping. I realized then that it couldn't have possibly been Jack who had tried opening my door. Moments later, I heard the sound of the front door to her apartment open and then close. At that point, I called Jack and told him what was going on. He realized he had forgotten to lock the apartment door. When he left, I ran over and locked the door. Whoever had been in our place had left. Then I went back to my room about 10 minutes later. When Jack returned, we both searched the apartment. Nothing was missing or stolen, and nobody was inside anymore. So who was in the apartment? And why we never found out. It remains a mystery, but neither of us forgot to lock the doors while living there again. I live alone in a house that I'm renting in a fairly average neighborhood. I moved here last year, and something really crazy happened shortly after. So it all started one day when I noticed this car parked a ways down the street. It was across from my house, and a little ways down it sort of stood out because it was our car, so it got my attention. I went outside to get my mail at the end of the driveway, and I remember that as I didn't notice that there was a man in the driver's seat of the red car. I found that strange because I had noticed the car out there like an hour earlier. Oh, had he just been sitting in the cart the whole time? When I saw the guy, he was not looking at me but looking down, and I'm guessing his phone. I just casually turned around and then walked back inside of my house. It didn't seem like too big of a deal to me or anything. So as it got later, the sun started to set. I was passing by the front of the house, and I noticed the red car was still the Reb. Also, I could see that the man was still in the driver's seat, and then I saw that his driver's window was down and he appeared to be taking a picture of my house or something. His phone was out and sort of pointed in my direction. I didn't think that he could see me or anything, but I moved away, just in case. Several minutes later, when I looked, he was finally gone. It was a pretty weird thing, but he was gone. Now, so I figured that was that, as strange as it might be. I just hoped that he would never return, but I was wrong. 2 nights later, I was at home by myself, and it was much later at night now. I didn't have work the next day, so I was staying up pretty late. I was in my bedroom, and I heard the sound of a loud bang coming from the back door. I got up and was instantly thinking that someone was trying to break in after leaving my bedroom. It started to head towards the back door but slowed down. I heard another loud bang and looked around to see if I had any kind of a weapon. I really didn't though, maybe I'm unprepared, but I just never thought that somebody would try to break into my house. It then heard whoever it was trying to open the back door to the house. Thankfully it was locked. I went over and looked out of a window. I just barely saw what looked like a man there, but I couldn't really make out any details. Everything was happening so fast for some reason. I did not call the police right away looking back. I don't know why you would think that would be the first thing to go through my mind in that situation, but I guess you never know how you will react in certain situations until you get in them. So anyways, there I was at the back door with some guy trying to get in. I got this crazy spontaneous idea and took out my phone. No, I still did not dial 911. Instead, I went to YouTube and looked up eerily loud and annoying alarm sound. I clicked on the first video and thankfully I forgot to turn my volume up because an ad started playing. Then I skipped the ad and turned my volume all the way. Hit play, the annoying alarms started blaring and thankfully it worked. The guy at my back door stopped trying to break in and he moved away. I then went back around the front of my property. Then after I calmed down a little, it finally came to my senses and dialed the police. They came out and looked around and saw some slight damage to my back door. It filled out our port and then the police left and said they would look around for the man. However, he was never found to my knowledge. I believe that it was the same man who I'd seen days prior. I don't know for sure, but those suspicious situations seem to be linked to me. Thankfully, nothing like that has happened since.